candidate running for U.S. Senate to represent the state of Michigan, Dr. Sherry O'Donnell. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bart. Nice to be here.
And your name might be familiar to some of our viewers because 2 years ago you ran for Congress.
I did in this district. Got a lot of support from the community.
You were running against incumbent.
I was.
Uphill battle.
It was an uphill battle.
So what did you, when you look back on that campaign, are there some things you learned that you're bringing to the Senate campaign?
Oh, without a doubt. In so many ways that teed me up for this, Bart. So I learned a lot. My name got some recognition out there and certainly ready to take this on.
So what would you say is the top issue that's on Michiganders' minds and for you in your campaign this year?
The top issue for most voters is indeed the border, and followed closely by inflation. But Bart, I've been to the border in 5 different points of location and points of entry. And if people understood how evil and what was going on at the border, they would just, they would go crazy with it because it is so evil, so heinous. So it is just beyond recognition.
What's the evil? Is it?
The human trafficking, the sex trafficking. That as a physician, I understand not only are they bringing over fentanyl, we're dealing with fentanyl overdoses, but they're also bringing over other disease, like TB, like sexual transmitted diseases. But the evil is the human trafficking and the sex trafficking that's going on. It is glaring, and it's happening on our side of the border, not just the Mexico side, but it's a $27 trillion per year industry. And we're not closing it.
So the Congress, they have failed again to pass any kind of immigration or border legislation. They can't come to an agreement. What would you do if elected, and what are your plans to solve or improve the border situation?
So first off, on day one, we do need to close it. When Tom Homan has endorsed me, and on my website, docsherry2024.com, I have an extensive 20-point plan to close that. And when I met Tom Homan, I said, Tom, I'm interested in really your opinion and whether what I'm saying makes sense. And he said, Doc, give it to me. If I like it, I'll endorse you. If I don't, I'll educate you. And Bart, he did both. But we've got to stop some of the asylum seeking. That is not asylum seeking. We have to leave in Mexico, but we have to shore up the borders. Right now, even the Border Patrol security there's a higher suicide rate than ever before because they're being disempowered to do their job. This is a Biden crisis as much as it is a border crisis.
So would you have voted for this most recent border legislation?
No, because we're still letting too many in. Bart, I have a heart for the world. I've been in 35 different countries. More than half have been disaster relief. But every single country I go in, I'm mandated. I have to show my passport. I have to, in some countries, have a visa to get in. And when I go in, I'm there to help the people during a crisis. I've never been met at the border with $5,000 money in an envelope and an ID and a phone and said, where would you like to go?
You had an interview a couple weeks ago. You talked about being in Ukraine as a doctor. Were you working on relief?
I was working on relief. So when I went in, their war broke out on February 24th. By March the 1st, I was in country. And then we sent in an additional 8 medical teams. But we were helping the victims of the war. And one lady in particular that we helped, she had shrapnel in her shoulder and her face. She literally threw herself over her children when the bombs were going off. She lost her husband. And then she said one of the things that just grabbed my heart, Bart. She said, I sold my children. I said, excuse me? She said, I sold my children. I did not know if I was going to live or die. And if I died, my children would be street slums. Now, she used the wrong word, but the connotation was certainly there. So yes, we went for medical relief, and we sent 8 subsequent teams.
So having visited there, I was surprised that you weren't in favor of U.S. financial support for Ukraine anymore.
No. Well, Bart, when we went on our money, on our donations, and not the taxpayer dollars. And what's happening right now is money is being sent without any accountability, without any transparency. We continue to fund this, and we can't without any accountability of that dollar. And when I was there, Zelensky is very dishonest with the people. And once again, it's the government against the people. And I will always serve we the people. And that's why I'm not in favor of it. You can't continue to send billions of dollars when our own border is so open and it's such a glaring contradiction of what's going on. We're funding Ukraine without any transparency and accountability, and we're not closing our own borders.
Funding from the United States for Ukraine is also being tied to funding for Israel and to Taiwan. Are you in favor? Are you not in favor of those packages as well?
I stand with Israel, and I think we need to do that in that they are our greatest ally in the Middle East, and we need to stand with Israel. But unfortunately, as so often in Congress and Senate, the bills are so omnibus and so much pork in there, you've got to be able to take it apart and stand for what you do agree with and stand against what you don't agree with. Do I think we need to support Israel? Yes.
The former president, Donald Trump, he's part of every Republican campaign in some way or another. How does he figure in yours?
I support Donald Trump. I think his policy was absolutely amazing. I don't think he's always made the wisest decisions in his endorsements. Unfortunately, 0 of 7 of his endorsements in Michigan have actually won. So this was very much a vindictive endorsement against Justin Amash. When Justin got in the race because he voted to impeach Trump, Trump came out and endorsed Mr. Rogers.
And I think Peter Meyer was in the race at the time as well. So it was probably a message to Peter Meyer.
Very much so.
So this Justin Amash, Mike Rogers, they've got, well, Amash, he's a multi-zillionaire, so they've got a lot of money. And how about your campaign? How do you? It's a tough uphill battle because of the deep pockets and the fundraising that Mike Rogers and Justin Amash have done. How do you counter that?
You know, one of the things I've become very aware of is that money doesn't vote in Michigan, voters do. When I'm reaching every voter around the state, I've been in 77 counties, and Catherine with Salt and Light Global has said, Doc, you're like a pinball, and it is. We're going around, we're touching the voters, and we don't coordinate our senators here, we vote for our senators here. And the voters are having the opportunity to see me, look at me in the face and understand that I'm representing the change that we need. If we want to do the same old, send those gentlemen that have been in Congress and in Senate before. Otherwise, if we're ready for the change, I'm bringing that refreshing change.
As a doctor, I see that's one of your pieces of your platform, having medical freedom, right?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about a couple health issues. The Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare. Would you be in favor of repealing that?
It needs to be repealed. Really what we're doing is taking and we're diluting the dollar to try to cover. One size does not fit all. And I think one of the things that we need to be looking at is across the state insurances, where it's not just state regulated, but across the state, that you can go to Indiana if you want to go to Indiana and receive your health care. But yes, I would be definitely for repealing the Affordable Care Act. It's not affordable for anybody.
So the Economic Policy Institute estimates that 880,000 people in Michigan will lose their insurance if that were to be repealed. What would happen to those people?
I think there's so many other alternatives available, and I think what we need to do is start holding the medical community for a level of transparency and be more competitive. Any other industry is competitive, and competitive then drives down the prices. And when you see certain hospitals will have 3 and 4 times the cost that somebody else does. So there's a lot of alternatives available. It's not the Affordable Care Act is the one and only savior.
Is abortion a campaign issue this year, given that the Supreme Court has made their ruling, the state of Michigan voters have made their vote known in our Constitution? Is there any point in your campaign on the topic of abortion?
Certainly when Roe versus Wade was turned back to the state, it is now a state issue. And whether I agree that the Michigan Constitution should now be rewritten and allow that, no, I don't. But it now has become a state issue. Do I think that the left is going to bring it up and make it an issue? Sure.
So what about IVF? So Alabama, their Supreme Court said IVF, that's illegal. That can't happen. Would you be in favor of that being part of, if there were federal legislation, or do you stay with the states?
I think that is a state-regulated issue. One of my concerns with IVF is that that still is life and has the potential of life. It is life. So, but that does need to be reconciled on a state level.
In the pandemic, as a doctor, you came out and made some comments that were anti-vaccine and anti-lockdown. What would you have done? How? And also, I think you've also thought I've heard the word plandemic, where it was a conspiracy. What was the pandemic, and how would you have responded?
So, thank you for asking that. So, I served in New York City for 93 days during the crisis. And because I do so much disaster relief, I was actually called on a Friday afternoon and asked if I would serve in New York City. My first response was, I know nothing about COVID. And they said, nor does anybody else. But bottom line is, I served in New York City. And what I saw in New York City can never happen again. When I was personally asked to sign 4 death certificates of patients that died of something else besides COVID, and when I said I can't do that, and they took the death certificates from me, Bart, and said, that's okay, we'll find somebody else. I thought, wait a second, I smell a rat and it's not in the sewage system. And then what I saw as far as not being able to prescribe medications, I personally have been on hydroxychloroquine multiple times when I've gone overseas. It's a great anti-malarial medication. So suddenly we're seeing that we're not allowed medications that would help patients. We're not allowed to use Solumedrol, which is an anti-inflammatory drug for the lungs. There were too many questionable things. I do believe that the COVID came out of Wuhan. And when you look at the money and you look at why medications weren't being allowed, and then the rapid speed at which the vaccines came out and were told, and even their PI, their package insert, had nothing on it, and the vaccine companies weren't held liable. And now we're seeing, a couple years forward, the numbers of vaccine injuries have been absolutely higher than some of the deaths with the COVID virus. So was COVID real? Yes. How we responded, Bart, was surreal. And we can never allow that to happen again. We can never allow the American people to be lied to in that way, and our medical freedoms be taken in such a way.
Do you think that the virus was unleashed on purpose?
Yes, I do.
Really?
And if that wasn't true, if it wasn't unleashed on purpose, the way we responded was certainly not for the betterment of the American people.
Are you concerned about election security? It seems like there's a lot of talk about, and going back 4 years, what about looking back? Was Michigan's election secure and valid?
I don't believe that the elections were secure and valid. And if that weren't an issue at all, we wouldn't be talking about it. So it concerns everybody right now. So that's not only just my concern, but when we look at the amount of people that were voted on and were on our voter rolls that aren't even living in Michigan, let alone alive any longer, Bart, there's a real problem with that. We need to clean up our voter rolls. We need to make certain that every Michigander that is a registered voter has the opportunity to vote and that their vote counts and counts once.
Do you think dead people voted?
When you look at the registration on the rolls, there were people that voted that were living in the 1800s. Now, if they have lived that long, I want their DNA.
You should want their vote.
Well, of course.
All right. So if people, are you going to have campaign events? You've got a website. How can people follow your campaign, Sherry?
My website is DocSherry, DocSherry, 2024.com. And yes, we've got an active website, and follow me on Facebook and the other social media.
All right. Well, good luck.
Thank you, Bart. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
Candidate for United States Senate representing Michigan, Dr. Sherry O'Donnell.